Hello and welcome. My name is Lisa Shark and I'm a professor of the practice of peace building here at the University of Notre Dame's Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies. I am pleased to welcome you today to this webinar as part of our Afghan Peace and Development Research Program to support and amplify the voices of Afghan scholars and practitioners in finding a way forward. It is my pleasure to introduce the moderator for today's webinar. Mr. Aref Dostiar is a senior advisor at the University of Notre Dame's Kroc Institute. Previously, he worked as Afghanistan's Consul General in Los Angeles, and prior to that, Mr. Dostiar worked at Afghanistan's Office of the National Security Council in the positions of Director General for International Relations and Director of Peace and Reconciliation Affairs. Dostiar's writing and interviews have been featured in the New York Times, by the BBC, the Foreign Policy magazine, New York Post, Voice of America, and several other outlets. Through a Fulbright scholarship, Dostiar earned a master's degree in international peace studies from the University of Notre Dame. So with all of these credits, I hand it over to you, Mr. Dostiar.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for that kind introduction. Salam and greetings to our distinguished panelists and those who are watching this webinar online. Let me provide a brief background, then I will introduce the speakers and have a conversation with them. There's a growing trend of reporting on violent clashes between the Taliban and armed groups in Afghanistan in different parts of the country. Various factions, such as the Afghanistan Freedom Front and the National Resistance Front and others, inflicted more than a couple dozen casualties to the Taliban fighters only in the month of April, according to local news sources. If these claims are true, as local sources confirm, then the conflict in Afghanistan would match the definition of an active conflict according to the University of Uppsala's Conflict Data Center. In other words, a conflict has not ended if it resurfaces within a year after victory or defeat of a side and causes 25 deaths. In addition to these clashes with the Taliban, ISIS has carried out a number of deadly attacks in the month of Ramadan. ISIS, unfortunately, has targeted civilians, particularly the Hazara and Shia community in Afghanistan. In February, the United Nations reported that ISIS launched 152 attacks in 16 provinces between August 15 and December 2021, compared to 20 attacks in only 5 provinces during the same period a year prior to that. These are concerning signs, and the trend does not seem to stop. This panel aims to provide an analysis on the dynamics between different armed groups, including the Taliban regime in Afghanistan. What are their interests and objectives? Will there be peace or more armed conflict as the weather warms up? How will it impact the humanitarian situation? What can and should be done about it at the local, regional, and global levels? We have a panel of experts who will share their analysis of the situation in the next 50 minutes. If you have questions or comments, please leave them in the Q&A section, not the chat box, and I will read them in the second part of the discussion. But first, let me introduce our speakers. Mohammad Moheq is the editor-in-chief of the prominent Hasht-e-Subh daily. Previously, he served as Afghanistan's ambassador to Egypt and presidential advisor in Kabul. Born and brought up in Afghanistan, Ambassador Moheq holds a master's degree in theology from Firdausi University of Mashhad and a bachelor's degree from Herat University. He has authored 6 books in Dari and translated another 6 books from Arabic to Dari. His writings have also been translated to Pashto. Focused on violent extremism, Ambassador Moheq is one of the most influential scholars of Islamic studies in Afghanistan. His interests include the drafting of a reformist doctrine and Islamic thought. Mrs. Shukria Barakzai, who is probably running late, and I hope she joins us soon, is an Afghan politician, a Muslim feminist, and an advocate for human rights. Mrs. Barakzai's public service positions include member of Afghanistan's parliament in the lower house, Orulisi Jirga, and Afghanistan's ambassador to Norway. Prior to that, Mrs. Barakzai was a journalist and founded the Aine Zan, or Women's Mirror weekly newspaper. Her campaigns included issues such as maternal and infant mortality areas in which Afghanistan has great difficulty. She continues to be a voice for Afghans inside and outside the country. And finally, my friend Graham Smith is a senior advisor for the International Crisis Group on Afghanistan. He has consulted for the Overseas Development Institute, the Norwegian Center for Conflict Resolution, the World Bank, and the United Nations. From 2015 to 2018, he served as a political affairs officer for the United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan. He headed Crisis Group's office in Kabul from 2012 to 2015. His earlier career as a journalist earned him several awards, including an Emmy Award in 2009 for a video series about the Taliban. His best-selling book, The Dogs Are Eating Them Now, Our War in Afghanistan, was first published in 2013. He co-wrote and presented an award-winning documentary, Ghosts of Afghanistan, which debuted in 2021. A warm welcome to you all. Let me pose the first question to you, Safiq Saib Moheq. How would you define the current context? There seems to be multiple conflicts going on. Please help us understand the situation on the ground in the country.
Thank you, Mr. Dusiar, and hello to every our guest or audience. Regarding to Afghanistan current situation, the first point we have to consider is a big uncommon shock most of Afghans experienced after the collapse of the government on last August. It was a national shock, and different layers of the society and the nation, we experienced that. Either the political activists, social activists, even many ordinary people on the street, they were in the shock and they didn't expect this kind of tragic and dramatic change on the ground. Now, since a few last months, by beginning of the new year, we feel that now the people or Afghanistan people are starting to get out from this shock or pass it and go forward one step for the future. So now we see different fronts against each other. The powerful front now are the Taliban, and they have acting government, acting cabinet. They are acting like a government or try to be a legitimate government, but we know they are suffering from lack of or not having legitimacy. Also, they couldn't make a relationship between them and the people, any kind of connection. They are not familiar with that. They are living in their mindset, which they inherited from the wartime. Still, they are looking at the Afghanistan picture from that angle. And it's a new experience for them to live in civil situation. They are trying to find some way to contact with the people by their speakers, but still they don't have any mechanism for communication with the people. So they are suffering in this field. At the same times, they are suffering from not legitimate and not recognized by the international community. They are suffering from the economic problems. They don't have enough resources for their financial needs as the government. It's very different from the past as an insurgent group. They were riding their motor bikes, and they were getting some local taxes from the local people. They were they had some drug trade and business at that time. But now, as a government, they are responsible against tens of millions of people in the country, and they don't have enough resources for that. They still look like they are confused about their discourse or their narrative in this situation. Before that, their narrative was focused or based on the resistance against the invasion, freedom of the country from the Western occupying the country, something like that. Their propaganda was focusing on these points. Right now, they don't have that narrative, and that is not working anymore. So they need to create new narrative for the people and for the international community, but still they are confused about that. What is the milestone? What is the frame? What is the main points of this narrative or new discourse they need to create it? It is in one front, the Taliban front. The other fronts, also they are in confusion. They are not under one umbrella. So we have the old Mujahideen. They are coming from Islamic background, but not like Taliban, and they have usually ethnic problem with Taliban. We have liberal and Democrat groups, which they were usually active in civil society organizations. Part of them escaped from the country, part of them still are staying in Afghanistan. They are suffering from the suppressed from the dictatorship way the Taliban are working. And also we have the women of Afghanistan. They are more than maybe around 20 millions. So they don't have any chance, any future. Most of them, they are hopeless about their future. Depression, it is a national depression across the country. So we have some new armed groups emerging from different corner of Afghanistan, not only in North Afghanistan, and East Afghanistan and West Afghanistan, in different places. So potentially Afghanistan is like a boiling place. It's ready for new insurgency, new conflicts, and new war. I think if the situation continues like that, we will go to a civil war. It would be very tragic, very dangerous. We can't expect all the consequences after that, but generally we know it is the way that the Taliban are running the country into that. In addition, the ethnic conflicts are increasing and increasing day by day by what the Taliban are doing on the ground. It is my understanding about the general situation in Afghanistan.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Moheq. Let me quickly ask a follow-up from Graham Smith, and then we're glad to see that Mr. Barakzai has also joined us. Thank you so much. Graham, how do you see, are there really various factions preparing or already launching attacks? As Ambassador Moheq shared, of course, the situation, definitely the context is really fragile and perhaps also conducive to more armed conflict. Is that also your understanding? And which groups do you see? What do you think their interests and objectives are?
Thanks. I'm grateful for the opportunity, especially for the chance to listen to Hasht-e-Subh, Moheq. And I don't pretend that my networks on the ground are anything like Hasht-e-Subh. So I can't pretend to have the same level of understanding. And I also think the data available to us are much poorer now than they were a year ago. The number of people who are counting violent incidents for the United Nations, for INSO, for other organizations, that we just have much less ability to really count violent incidents. And I think it is very important to count because it helps us to put things in context. Of course, the latest report of the Secretary General on behalf of UNAMA reported a 91% decrease in violence in Afghanistan as compared to the same period a year earlier. There has been a little bit of an uptick in the last month. I think the New York Times was claiming about 100 people killed in the last month. It's an easy mistake to make because, to be honest, like 100 would have been the body count from a single day this time last year. And so if that's the body count now for a month, it does suggest, as you say, that there is an armed conflict by the definition used by Uppsala. But if you look at UCDP, they're calling this a minor armed conflict, right, with at least 25 battle deaths per year. I don't even know if Afghanistan will qualify as a war by that definition in this calendar year, because to have a war, you need to have at least 1,000 battle deaths per year between major combatants. I think at Crisis Group, we're still trying to prepare a report on the security picture, and it's quite difficult because doing the research is confusing, to say the least. I was just in Kabul a couple of weeks ago, and I was speaking by telephone with someone who claimed to be representing one of these our northern factions. He was a figure in the previous government, and he was saying, the Taliban fear to go at night. Every night, it's a firefight in the mountains north of the city. I mean, I was going for picnics in the mountains north of the city. It seemed pretty calm. I have to admit, I didn't hear any gunfire. But that's just a small observation, and so I think we have to be very humble about what we know and what we don't know. For the moment, it does really seem like the level of violence is dramatically lower than it was last year. But as you said, it's a fragile situation. So let's see. I think it's clear that the greatest source of violence is not the northern factions that are affiliated with the former government. It's quite obviously the local Daesh affiliate, Islamic State Khorasan province, that is killing the most people right now. And I think that's where you're likely to see the most intense conflict on the ground is Taliban going east and killing Daesh, and Daesh retaliating. And I think that's going to be for the moment in this calendar year, I think that will be the main vector of violence. But I would be happy to be corrected by my fellow panelists, because you know better than I do. Thanks.
Just quickly, Graham, on that, who is Daesh in Afghanistan?
So as you know, the local ISIS affiliate, Islamic State Khorasan province, many members previously belonged to Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan previously. I think when it was founded, a good number of them were Barakzai, which, as you know, is both a tribe and also a piece of geography inside Pakistan. But they've had various members, some of them drawn from old IMU groups. So they have a certain number that are sort of ethnically Uzbek, which might account for some of the recent tensions between ISKP and Uzbekistan. But you know, I would say that the Taliban in their previous stint in power had a fair bit of difficulty with restive Salafists in the East. I'm sure you remember better than I do, and maybe Safir Moheq, you know, actually remembers this, that there was ongoing fighting in the 1990s between the Taliban and the Salafists in the Eastern Mountains. And so, you know, the roots of Daesh in the East are fairly deep in terms of there's the fundamental difference between, you know, a predominantly Hanafi Taliban movement and Salafists, Wahhabists who completely disagree with them on a religious basis.
Well, thank you so much, Graham. Let me move on to Ambassador Barakzai, if she's with us, and maybe have her perspective on how much should we be concerned, given the what has happened so far and the incidents that we have seen since the Taliban's takeover and some of the movements that we have seen from different factions. Do we see those factions becoming bigger and posing greater threats of armed opposition to the Taliban, or the situation and conditions conducive to that? How concerned do you think we should be, and what, Mrs. Barakzai, what is your understanding of the situation on the ground? And I think you are on mute, Safir Saib.
Good afternoon, good evening, and for some, maybe good morning. First of all, please accept my apology because it's just the technology sometimes doesn't work, and sometimes also the time frame is not on my hand. For all inconvenience, accept my apology. When you ask about the, let me begin with a few things. First of all, it's not only few groups of terrorist network that they've been active in Afghanistan. I think in the last few decades, we heard about more than 22 international terrorist networks are being active in Afghanistan. And right now we cannot define and we cannot justify that only Taliban, only Al-Qaeda, only Daesh, or only few others. I think now it's a very safe space and geography are the hands of those terrorist network groups, which is, I believe, they are not only belong to one specific region, they came from across the globe, including some Arabs, some Chechenese, some Uyghurs, Uzbeks, Tajiks. But of course, you can see multi-ethnicity from different parts of the world right now are armed and active in Afghanistan. This is for sure. When it comes about the situation and current situation and how we can you repeat your question? Sorry, like the main.
Yes. I was saying, how concerned are you in about the situation? And maybe as you were sharing about these other groups, if you could also mention if they are a threat to the Taliban and if the Taliban are doing anything about that as well.
I will come for concern. Militarily, each single member of those 22 terrorist network groups are a big concern, not only for the security of Afghanistan, but for the globe. Because none of them cannot be a type of group to be hold them accountable about their activity. And the nature of those groups are being a part of, although the definition of terrorism and terrorist groups is something not clear yet, but we do understand the type of their activities. I'm very concerned if we leave Afghanistan the way it is at the moment. Number one, because the Taliban, as you know, they are not anymore a unified group as they was during the 90s, because during the 90s, one small letter from Amir was more than enough for across the country that Taliban will obey. But nowadays, when the Amir coming with the 16 recommendation, a proper order, the foot soldiers are not really taking care of those, or they are not listening what Amir says. And if you see one type or promising about the girls' school, about the, you know, inclusive government, but on the other type of Taliban, they are been stacking about their own mentality, and they are not fulfilling their promises. So it seems to me that even the conflict among the Taliban themselves, which is every single day, as Mr. Graham mentioned, but let me say from the other side of angle, people are living in Kabul, and this is concerning issue. They say it, and they are raising their concern. They say every single night there are some gunfires. There are even some heavy weapons is going to be used, but we don't know, since the lack of media, who's fighting whom and why. Number one. So this is something which is a part of concern. Number two, there's no proper justice system that someone can go and submit their complaint and to see the results. So as we know, as we are aware, the target killing, and that is a part of concern. When there's nobody is accountable for their own, for instance, okay, the de facto authorities right now, they should be responsible for the safety and security of the people. But even while they're arresting, and after 6 weeks, they are coming and saying, oh, at the beginning denying, and at the end accepting and bringing excuses, it seems like they themselves are not anymore the Taliban as they was before. There are lots of different fractions among the Taliban. This is number one. Number two, there are regional, how I could say, complicity in the politics, and that also affect the Taliban. For instance, Haqqanis are more close to Pakistan, and Kandaharis are more close to Qatar. Haqqanis was been true to Pakistan. They linked and channeled their relationship with Russia, with China. Where the Kandaharis, true to Qatar, they keep their contact with a Western country and United States. So you see, the conflict of interest may also be one of the greatest concerns, that it may lead Afghanistan to be engaged and involved even on those wars which is we are not part of it, such as Ukraine. For instance, when the Putin asked all those fighters that without any concern they can come and they can join, we saw the large number of Chechenis stand with the Putin, and they was fighting in Ukraine. And it seems like the green light from Kremlin to the Taliban and the diplomacy that recently they start in Moscow and Beijing, and that's a kind of alarming the security of Afghanistan, because it is a time that we can see the Afghanistan is going to be divided again when it comes to a global context of politics. One is going to be with East, another is going to be West. So this seems to be another conflict for the Afghanistan. And when it comes to concern, when the country is facing lack of legitimacy of the government, when there's a lack of a proper accountable government authorities, when there's international global terrorist networks are more active than the de facto authorities, screaming so loud needs of their life, when there's a human rights and women's rights are a part of a deal, and when it's going to be neglected by the de facto authorities, those are not a minor concern that we should say. Things will be move on with the current situation. Besides, if we like or not, if we accept or not, the military resistance also is a reality, such as Taliban themselves.
Thank you so much, Safir Barakzai.
Sorry?
Your voice is breaking a little bit, but thank you so much. I'll come back to you. That is such it's a very comprehensive picture about the internal dynamics and also regional issues and global issues that can perhaps impact the situation on the ground. Thank you so much, Safir Sahib. I just want to have one other follow-up question before we move on to the next set of questions that I have for you. And I'll ask Safir Sahib Moheq to respond to this. People say that there are maybe some groups and some people and movements, but how serious are they? How can we identify these groups so that we can count them really as groups and factions that are relevant? What really makes these groups relevant? And that's why the question of Taliban versus ISIS is mostly highlighted. But what about these other groups? How relevant are they, or will they become relevant? Safir Sahib, what is your understanding of that?
I think when we were in Kabul, you were working in the National Security Council and I was working with the president. We discussed a little bit about this file. Also, I was in contact with your other colleagues working in National Security Council about this file. It was very complicated. There are some rumors and some facts, how we distinguish between the facts and the rumors or the propaganda. As I know, according to my studies and following the issue, either by the official authorities that time or by the people on the ground. I know many mullahs, many activists, many other people from civil society in Herat, in Farah, Nimruz, or also in East Afghanistan, Kunar, Nangarhar, Laghman. I think the extremist groups, in addition to the Taliban, there are three groups. One of them are the ISIS, which we know as Daesh. They are now the most challenging group for the Taliban, and potentially they are alternative group for the extremists leading this approach. The competition is between the Taliban and the ISIS for taking the leadership of the extremist international organizations. The other group is Al-Qaeda. They were alive for the Taliban. They are Salafi people, and Taliban didn't have and don't have still. They don't have a deep problem with the Salafi group. It is in the shallow, there is some differences between the Taliban and the Salafis, but according to the epistemologic roots, there is not big difference between the Deobandis, which the Taliban are coming from that background, and the Salafi groups. Their interpretation of Islam is very similar. They are looking at the modern eras and modern values. They are very similar. They think about the woman very similar. They think about the human rights very similar. They look at their ideal society and ideal government, they are very similar. I don't see any big difference between the Salafis and the Taliban. So Al-Qaeda are core Salafi jihadi group. You know, IS were students of the Osama bin Laden and Ayman Zawahiri. They were another generation of Al-Qaeda. They emerged and they became another fraction. Their conflict was about the tactics, not about the strategy. Abu Musab Zarqawi, Abu Abdullah Muhajir, and after that Abu Bakr Baghdadi, some other people, they were the next generation of Salafi jihadists. They were not, they didn't agree with the old generation like Ayman Zawahiri leadership. So their conflict is not about the ideology or about their goals. They have only some difference about the details, how we reach that purposes, that goals, so that how we achieve our sorry, and how we create the state we are looking for. So now the Taliban have their relationship with the Al-Qaeda, and Al-Qaeda has its relationship with many other extremist groups in subcontinent, in North Africa, in Somalia, in also in Middle East, in Iraq, in Syria, in different places, even in Sinai and Egypt. So Taliban have their backdoor to have access to this international organizations as a backup for potential or for when the situation of the political balance changed. They are trying to keep this part now hidden. They are talking with an international community, pretending or trying to say we stopped our relationship with them, we are different, we are not Al-Qaeda, we are not ISIS. But actually, in the fact, they keep that relationship. They have their underground, they have their hidden relationship with them, and they count on them as a strength for themselves. They can threaten the international community if they don't fulfill their requirements. So we have the Taliban, we have ISIS, and we have Al-Qaeda. The fourth part are the Pakistani groups. You know, the population of Pakistan is very big. So according to that big population, the portion of extremist groups are diverse and they are rich. They are big groups. They have Lashkar Tayyiba, they have Sapah Sahaba, they have Lashkar Jangwi, they have Sapah Mohammad, they have Jayshul Mujahideen, many other groups. Part of them are under influence of Jamaat Islami Pakistan, which was based off Maududi's thoughts. Some groups are coming from the Ubandi's background, like Fazlur Rahman, Samiul Haq, and Baytullah Mahsud, Hakimullah Mahsud, Mullah Fazlullah, Sufi Muhammad, and other leaders they had. So part of these Pakistani groups are also very active in the region because they are very familiar with the geography. They have some ethnic relationship with some other tribes in the neighboring area. They were active in Kunar, in Nuristan, in Bajwar, in Timurgar, in Waziristan, in Miramshah, also going to Kashmir of Pakistan. So these people are very good trained. They have their support from the ISI of Pakistan. They have their relationship with the political parties like Jamaat Islami and Jamaat Ulama Islam, and they have their kind of relationship with the Taliban or part of the Taliban. So the scene is very complicated, and it is in different level of the society, and the mosque and the universities and schools, religious schools, regular schools. So I don't think small groups like Uyghur or Chechenis or like Uzbeks are big problem because their number is small. As I followed, they don't have hundreds or thousands of people, but the Pakistani groups, they have thousands of members. And Al-Qaeda is potentially a big challenge for Afghanistan security, and ISIS or Daesh. ISIS we have one actual active ISIS. They are fighting the Taliban. We have a potential ISIS, which are part of the Taliban. They are not happy with the leadership approaches, and they think to change their position politically, not ideologically. The ideology is very similar, same. I don't see any big difference between the Taliban and ISIS about the ideology, but politically, yes. And some, especially some non-Pashtun Talibans from Uzbeks, from Tajiks, they are unhappy with the Taliban leadership. They are trying to contact with the ISIS people. They are shifting day by day. I get the news from the ground. Just 2 hours ago, when I had news from Herat that mullah, that person who were with the Taliban in the past, they are from Tajiks. They now shifting to go to ISIS. Same thing happens in Badakhshan and Faryab and different places. So I think in midterm time, maybe during 6 months, 1 year later, we will see more number from the Taliban are shifting to the ISIS according to some ethnic conflicts inside the Taliban. So I think still we are encountering more challenges, and the situation is not predictable completely.
Well, thank you so much, Safir Saab. That's such a comprehensive picture of all of these groups. Let me just quickly move on to one other question, then we will take one round of questions from the audience. And so people can list their questions in the Q&A section. And that my question is, what options exist right now, both for all of these different Afghan factions, and what can be done about the situation to prevent further chaos and violence in the country at the regional and also global levels? I understand that's a big question. We may not be able to cover it. We might have to have a dedicated session on that some other time, but if you can briefly share, we'll hear from Ambassador Barakzai and then from Graham Smith. And then I'll move on to questions from the audience. We already have received some questions.
It's a very timely question. It should be a very a debate that every single politician, including Taliban, should consider the today's situation, circumstances in Afghanistan, where Taliban they're well aware they cannot lead the country, they cannot control their power, and they cannot exist more with a certain policy ideas and rules that they are implementing, enforcing now. What is important? Number one, of course, everybody has the ideas of inclusive government, but nobody was trying to justify or to give a definition of what is inclusive government. From my understanding, the inclusivity and politics is one of the, especially in a situation such as Afghanistan, because starting from the 2009, where the first Doha office was been opened till now, it was the idea to bring the Taliban in power and keep every other political military groups under one umbrella. And this is how, although I personally, I never like to have this type of share government or share company, and especially when it goes to be measured by violence and gun. But the reality of Afghanistan today is required, number one, comprehensive collective effort from all political actors in Afghanistan, outside of Afghanistan, to be agree on certain principles, for instance, geography, for instance, national interest, and for instance, the sovereignty of the country. So if all political, let's say, actors and figures will be agree on that, then they can move on, rather than thinking about which ministries whom should be, or dividing power by percentage. Number two, what is very important, as we've been witness during in 2018, even before, when the Taliban got a platform, a political diplomatic platform, while the legitimate government of Afghanistan was been exist, and they received so much support from the international community, and that's how they end over at the end the power to the Taliban. It's not, if anybody was saying and justifying that Taliban win this war, no. In the last 20 years, they were not been able to control one single province. How possible in 20 days they controlled, they took over Afghanistan. So that was just some political, let's say, agenda was been formed before. So if the international community being agree about alternative, even not alternative, at least some platforms similar, such as Taliban. Most of them are asking, oh, who are they? Where are they? I think there's a few new initiatives. One is, of course, under the, they called Muqawmat Musalahana, the northern one, under Ahmad Masood, and the other is the ex-government or republic side political initiative, and the other is a combination of Mujahideen, where Atta and others are involved. So at the moment we have these three, but that three is never can be completed without not adding the real, let's say, resistant force is the women in Afghanistan. So if we add women, civil society, political elite, and well-known political figures in Afghanistan, plus academia, then we can say that will be a kind of platform, and that platform needs to talk with the Taliban, with the international community support. If we like or not, war and peace in Afghanistan never was a domestic issue. So the way the power was been handed over to the Taliban, and this is the time that Taliban needs to fulfill, even if it's a Doha agreement, or if it's those 30 pages or 40 pages agreement they had separate with the United States of America. So from my understanding, such a kind of initiative should take a place. Otherwise, the current situation in Afghanistan, as from my understanding and knowledge, is more dangerous than any other time. Poverty could be the biggest enemy, which is through to poverty. Who knows, maybe ISIS will get, or Daesh Khorasan will make it more landscape of Afghanistan, and they will be out of control, or the brutality of the Taliban will make some sorts of changes that Afghanistan will be divided from one to other. But I have one concern. If we think that Taliban are representing Pashtun and maybe in near future the IS will represent Tajiks and other. I think this is what we are trying to just say. The people of Afghanistan are part of international and national terrorist networks. I believe every extreme idea, every single individual opinions where it's been made it outside and injected inside for the political will of certain countries, or to keep the strategic depth of neighbors in Afghanistan, we should not consider it as ideas that ethnic or Afghans are carrying on with themselves. We've been living forever for so long. We never say, and history cannot say, we've been part of certain terrorist network activity, and even including Al-Qaeda and others. Of course, after Jihad, during 70s, things changed, but even at that time, we were not the way we are seeing it today. Extremism is something, and Taliban ideas are more ideas rather than, at least from my understanding, or Daesh rather than ethnicity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Safir Saab. That's very helpful. And you also covered several of the questions that audience asked, including the role of people who are outside of Afghanistan, and also on the question of inclusivity you touched. That was very helpful and already covered a few questions. And so I'm just embedding people's questions and rephrase it again to Graham, and then we will go to Ambassador Moheq and end it. So we have about 6 minutes. We will divide that between you. Graham, what do you think? People are also asking, what can people on the ground do? What can people who are outside do? And also, if you have time within that 2-3 minutes, if you could squeeze the role of the region and the global community, what should be done in order to prevent another armed conflict in Afghanistan?
Sure. Thanks for the question. I apologize. Maybe I had some audio issues on my end, so I'm afraid I didn't fully understand everything that Ms. Barakzai was saying. But in any case, I think there is a need to avoid the mistakes of the past, which involved funding various rebel factions that plunged Afghanistan into deadly civil wars over the last 40 years. I think we at the moment have a Taliban that has a greater degree of contiguous territorial control across Afghanistan than any group has had since about 1978. And on my recent visit to Afghanistan, it was clear that many ordinary Afghans are happy that the war is over. And I hope that we can avoid a return to war. As you said, that has a regional component to it. So it involves persuading India, Tajikistan, France, Iran, Turkey, and other countries that might be tempted to support anti-Taliban factions materially, to reach a consensus amongst these regional and international actors about under what conditions they at least would not seek the overthrow of the Taliban government, even if they do not yet feel prepared to recognize the Taliban government. What I've been hearing from regional and international actors is that they would like to see more inclusivity in the Taliban government, but honestly, it's a bit hard to define what exactly is that they want. And so I think there's a need for multilateral coordination on this and some peace building, trying to reduce those tensions, especially between Afghanistan and Tajikistan, where I think there's a real risk that that spills over into actual conflict. So what can ordinary people do on the ground? Well, I'll tell you what they are doing on the ground. I mean, there are still hundreds of thousands of civil servants working every single day with the Taliban now. I mean, you walk into a ministry and you have people who were hired under the Republic, you have people who were hired under the Emirate, and they're side by side. And so peace is a daily activity for them. They're trying to make the government work. And it's quite amazing to see after the deadliest conflict on the planet Earth. 30,000, 40,000 people a year were being killed previously. And now the people who were on opposite sides of that fight are sitting down with pens and paper trying to make a future of Afghanistan together. And so I think that effort should be supported as much as can be. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Graham. That's it's very helpful. Ambassador Moheq, final question to yourself. The same question, what should be done? And maybe if you could also touch on the role of the Taliban themselves. What can they do and what should they do in order to prevent something big from happening?
I'm not very hopeful about the Taliban. But we know that the Taliban part of the reality in Afghanistan. If we were in a free situation, free referendum, we see how percentage of the people of Afghanistan are supporting the Taliban. My guess is they have around 20 to 30% of the voices in Afghanistan as a party if they go to the parliament or if they want to form a government. They are not more than 30% or maybe not more than 20%. But it is not based off any field research by very solid data. It's just understanding generally about the situation. My suggestion is that Taliban are not capable to be a regular government. They were insurgent group. They occupied the government. I get every day news that they are removing the people from the bureaucratic people and autocratic people from their position, and they appoint their members, illiterate members, the fighters, as the manager, as the director, as the government people. So we are going to a disastrous situation inside the system of the government. They are destroying the regular system. So we have to focus on the alternative of the Taliban. The first point is very important, that the international community don't recognize Taliban as a legitimate government. The second, they have to support the civil activists, women activists, human rights activists, other groups, especially the people are outside of Afghanistan. They have still their influences on the public opinion and also what is going on the ground. We need sometimes some limited support, military support, but not really in large range in Afghanistan. We need support some group of the old former government officers. They are organizing themselves. They have their national perspective. They are not belonging to any ideology, or they were not part of any warlord groups. They were trained to work for the government, for the nation, not for any single political party. My suggestion is we have to prepare for a new conference like Bonn conference. We invite the Taliban, we invite other groups. We form government in exile. It would be an umbrella for many political groups. Most of Afghan people can be part of this government, and we will show an address for many other groups, non-Taliban groups. So the Taliban also face a reality that the balance is changing. If we just focus on the passive security, which was achieved by suppressed by dictatorship, it is not real security. Every person in Afghanistan are living in fear. I know even mullahs, even ordinary people. One mullah denied to give his number to the Hajj department in Herat. The security department, the intelligence department, ordered to be killed. It was just 1 week ago. Everything and everywhere in Afghanistan, we experiencing this kind of dictatorship and fear. So we have to give other people chance to have their voice. We make an umbrella, collect them under that. Then the Taliban start a negotiation with all groups. Taliban can be and should be part of the new government, not the only group dominant of Afghanistan.
Well, thank you so much, Ambassador Moheq, for that very interesting recommendation. And I also want to thank Ambassador Barakzai for taking the time to join us, and also Grim Smith. All of you provided an excellent understanding and insight on the situation, about the situation on the ground. And of course, 1 hour is not enough to talk about this topic, and I hope that we can continue this conversation. One thing is apparent, that there are risks, that the situation certainly needs attention, and that we need to do everything we can in order to prevent further war and violence in our country, and that all sides will need to take responsibility for that. And if they don't, then unfortunately the risks exist, and we hope that it doesn't become too late before we can do something about it. So thank you so much, and I also want to thank our audience for their questions, which I try to embed within the questions that I pose to our speakers. And you have a great day.